Welcome to San Diego and Super Bowl 22, the Washington Redskins and the Denver Broncos.
And Williams going deep. Sanders beats Haynes. Sanders out in front. 80 yards, touchdown. Williams for Clark. Touchdown.
Washington comes storming back.
Williams deep for Sanders again. Makes the catch at the 10. Touchdown.
That Doug Williams has been voted the MVP of the game.
And look at his teammates surrounding Doug Williams.
A class week for the Washington Redskins and Doug Williams in particular.
Washington is the Super Bowl champion after thrashing the Denver Broncos 42-10. Doug Williams becomes the first black quarterback to both start and win a Super Bowl. That Super Bowl in San Diego was quite the game. And today, we won't be talking about it. Instead, we're going to dive into how we got to that day at Jack Murphy Stadium, and really what happened in the 14 days between the 1987 NFC Championship and Super Bowl 22. This is Hail Tales, Stories from Washington Football History, Episode 1. Surprise roommates, media madness, and the Super Bowl hero you've never heard of. Doug Williams' story of lifting that trophy on January 31st, 1988, may as well start with a finish. That is, the end of the United States Football League. The USFL was a pro football league in the U.S. that played a spring-summer schedule. For the 1986 season, the USFL owners wanted to move their schedule to the fall in an attempt to directly compete with the NFL. It was a risky decision that ultimately didn't pay off. Washington, though, as sports writer Rick Snyder explains, benefits from the fiasco.
The USFL folds the year before, and that really sets them up in '87 because they pick up Doug Williams, not only Doug Williams, for $1 million. They had to call Cook at home and say, listen, we want to sign this backup quarterback. Cook didn't get away with that. But they said it's $1 million, which was huge money back then.
Coach had a plan. He was scheming.
I'm Coach Joe Gibbs, and I look at myself as a Redskin and commander for a number of years, totaling 15.
Coach had worked with Williams down in Tampa Bay, which was important. But more significant, Coach Gibbs advocated for Williams because he believed so hard in the signal caller's talents. That belief led Tampa Bay to take Williams in the first round of the 1978 draft, which made the Grambling State star the first black quarterback to be drafted in the first round. And here, Gibbs was advocating for him again.
When we got Doug, the thing I loved about having Doug, a veteran guy, and of course I had a background with him, knowing what kind of guy he was and performer. What I love to have with a young quarterback playing, I love to have a veteran backup behind him. And of course, Doug fit perfectly for that.
Williams, the veteran, is set to be the backup. And Jay Schrader, the young guy, is the starter. But Christine Brennan, who covered the team for the Washington Post, recalls the uncertainty at the position.
You had the switching of quarterbacks, basically back and forth, true uncertainty. If Jay Schrader would keep the job or if Doug Williams would get a chance, then Doug got a chance, then Jay was back, then Doug.
And as the year went, it just became obvious towards the end of that year. Doug had a chance to play a few times for us, played extremely well. And we kind of felt like the further we went in the season, it became more obvious that we felt like Doug would be the ideal quarterback for us to start playing. And so it was just a process as that year took place.
Doug Williams is the starter in the 1987 playoffs. Almost right away, as the team's then director of media relations, John Canosa, remembers, there's this rumble about the history Williams could make that begins to crescendo. If Washington kept winning, and Williams kept playing how he was playing, he'd be the first black quarterback to start a Super Bowl.
Everybody knew. It was, it was one of those things that was just so obvious. It's not like we had 50 Super Bowls. That was 22. So we'd only had 21 games up to that point, and it wasn't, you didn't have to do a whole lot of research. Everybody knew that was the case.
On January 17th, 1988, Washington beats the Vikings in the NFC Championship. And it becomes real. This is happening. A black quarterback is going to start a Super Bowl. For Shaq Harris, one of Williams' closest friends, the magnitude of the moment dawned on him right away.
I can remember when he won the championship game and how excited he was, how excited I was, and how excited everybody we knew was.
Left side, Doug Williams back to pass, looking, throws into the end zone. It's a touchdown on a diving catch by Gary Clark. And the Redskins regain the lead with 5:15 to go. And it looks like they're going to go Super Bowling to San Diego in 2 weeks.
So proud of him. So we spent a lot of time, I think, sharing that moment. And I think after that, Doug was able to refocus and start focusing on the business at hand, the Denver Broncos, which was was a real challenge there because so many people was reaching out to him, and he was representing so much.
I had already written, and we'd certainly talked on TV shows about Doug and his place in history, i.e., as a black man playing what even back then was still seen as a white man's position. And the important markers in history were already there in my mind, but now the nation was going to find out about it. This was going wide. This was going from Washington, a story that was a football story, a story that was building over several months. And then now it's going to go to a national audience, and not just a sports audience, but a cultural audience and a historic audience in the sense of what Doug Williams means, not just in sports, not just in Washington, but not just in football, but now in history and in our cultural history in our country. And so, I was well aware of all that, but there was still a real improbable nature to the whole thing that, wait a minute, Washington really did this? Joe Gibbs really pulled this off? This team is going to the Super Bowl?
When that game was over, I realized that I was going to be playing in the Super Bowl. Being the first black quarterback, to be honest with you, at that time didn't really hit me. It was just the fact that I was going to have a chance to play in the Super Bowl. That was the most important thing to me. As the days went along, the week went along, then you realize that you're the first black quarterback. And I realized at that particular time there probably was going to be some media and everybody else going to be looking to do an interview with and I didn't want to do that. So I just stayed away.
During that first week of Super Bowl prep in Washington, Williams does not stay at his own house.
I didn't go home. I went to one of my friend's apartment, and I stayed there because, I knew I didn't want nobody coming by my house. Whether they did, I don't know. But I didn't want no knocks on the door or anything like that. I just went to Big Herb, we called him. Called him No Weight Lover, Big Herb. We was teammates at Grambling, but he lived up here. And, Big Herb was the guy that when you talk about running with somebody, that's who I ran with most of the time. And all the boys used to call him the Old Weight Lover because he was about 6'6" at that time, about 300 pounds. So they called him the Old Weight Lover. So that's who I hung with. If something to be done, he was there.
So Williams is going to and from Big Herb's for practice. And the rest of the Burgundy and Gold, from the team to the business personnel, are also doing what they need to do to get ready for San Diego.
The good news was it wasn't our first rodeo. And Joe Gibbs was really good at, we got 1 week to handle all the family stuff, all the travel, all the logistics. And then we have that second week when we're actually in San Diego to focus on football and practice and preparation and get into as close to a normal work week as humanly possible. You know, at the Super Bowl, it's not possible, but Joe was a stickler for routine, and we had to do everything. When we got to San Diego, he wanted everything just like it was a normal work week.
Now, the week of the Super Bowl, that's fantastic.
Charles Mann, 3-time Super Bowl champion and 4-time Pro Bowler.
I mean, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about that because don't get to talk about that much. But we had the fiercest practices.
I tell you, they were so physical that I actually cut practice short. I said, our guys are ready. I mean, it was like they were, we actually were physical in practice. We ran our 32 offensive plays and roughly the same number of defensive plays against each other. And I remember that thing being so physical a couple of times, like on those Wednesday practices. I cut practice short because I said, we're going to get somebody hurt. These guys, they were ready.
Hurry, to go.
The practices aren't the only part of that week that are intense. Media day ahead of Super Bowl 22 is a whole other animal. On that Tuesday, all the Washington players load up on buses to go to Jack Murphy Stadium, where reporters from around the country had the chance to ask questions. And Doug Williams is swarmed.
Hey, Doug, has there been much progress when the schools you grew up in were finally integrated?
You know, I had no problem with the media as long as they was asking civilized questions and things like that. And, it was only one question that came up. And to be honest with you, it did not bother me.
The question, how long have you been a black quarterback?
I knew the guy who asked the question. He was originally from Jackson, Mississippi, who covered Grambling and Jackson State during that time. His name is Butch Jones. Since then, Butch Jones, bless his soul, has passed away. But Butch Jones called me before he passed. He was telling me all the medical issues that he was having. But he told me he appreciated the way I handled the question, because what he asked me was, how long I had been a black quarterback. And the way it came out, and I told him, since I left Grambling, and that was the truth. But I knew what he was trying to say, and I wasn't gonna make him look bad or anything like that, because I understood where he was coming from, and I just said, hey, since I left Grambling, that's when I became a black quarterback.
Though so much of the attention was focused on Williams that day, fun fact, that's not where the concern of Director of Media Relations John Canosa was.
Doug was predictable. Dexter, not so much.
I'm Dexter Manley, 1981 to 1990. John's a young guy, and to be quite frank with you, to be candid, I wasn't listening to John.
On media day, I was around Dexter.
If it was Charlie Yes, or if it was Bobby Better or Joe Gibbs, I'm not listening to that intern, whatever he was.
The big thing is we didn't want to do anything to fire up the Denver Broncos.
It's all about shock value.
And then so then we had to have meetings with Dexter. Okay, if you don't want to answer a question, you don't answer a question. Okay, but then you say next question and you go. So Dexter was the one that was being schooled up.
It wasn't a strategy. It's just off the cuff, as I said, being indifferent, and that's about it.
Doug, again, I had no concerns at all.
Amidst all that outside noise, while getting ready for the biggest game he'd ever play in, Williams found ways to stay grounded and be in a good headspace. Loved ones in San Diego helped with the lighthearted and positive energy. Robert Williams was so excited for his brother Doug.
The first game that they played in the championship was they played Minnesota. Doug sent all the money home that he had earned from that game, and told my mother to bring all of us who want to come. And I think I can remember I went a little earlier to San Diego, but my mother and others came later, and they brought 21 on the airplane to San Diego. We flew into L.A., and we had a friend had a mobile home there, and he picked us up and brought us to his house where we had a lot of food there and enjoyed each other. Then we drove on into San Diego, and we spent a week there.
And Doug Williams wasn't the only member of his family doing something for the first time that week.
My mom, it was my mom's first time flying.
So that must have meant, was that her first time watching you play for Washington?
That was her first time watching me play for Washington.
His family there was just a reminder of how ready Williams was for this moment.
Doug had a lot of confidence, and we all had a lot of confidence in him. Growing up, one of the things that I stressed with my brothers and the sisters as well, to have confidence and believe that you can do it. And Doug is one of those persons who worked hard and believed that he could do it.
While Williams was feeling good above the neck mentally as the week wore on, physically above the neck was a different story. On Saturday morning, the day before the Super Bowl, Williams wakes up with tooth pain that cannot be ignored. And in steps this guy.
Hello. My name is Barry Rudolph, and I was the team dentist during the glory years from 1983 to 1995. Traveled with the team mostly everywhere they went. And actually, that was an unusual thing because not all football teams had a dentist that traveled with them, but the Redskins were forward-thinking, and they had an internist, an orthopedic surgeon, and a dentist as physicians on call.
That weekend in San Diego, Dr. Rudolph would be called on to perform what might be described as one of the most important dental surgeries in the history of sports.
It started out about 2 or 3 weeks before the Super Bowl, which was, I guess, January 31st, 1988. And once we beat the Minnesota Vikings and we knew we were going to the Super Bowl, I called a dental school friend of mine. It was about 10 years I had seen him. We were classmates, and I knew he practiced in the San Diego area. And I knew, obviously, we were going to be playing in San Diego. And I thought, well, let me try to plan ahead in case we have any kinds of emergencies. So I called my friend Dave, and I said, hey, Dave, I'm going to be coming out to San Diego in about 3 weeks. And Dave said to me, oh, no, don't come out then. I said, well, why not? He goes, oh, it's going to be a mob scene. We have the Super Bowl here, and it's going to be crazy. And I said, no, Dave, you don't understand. He said, I'm coming out because I work for the Redskins, and I'm involved with the Super Bowl. He goes, oh, okay. So I said, the reason that I'm calling you is because in case I have a dental emergency, I want to know if it's okay if I use your office.
Dave says, sure. And thank goodness for that. Fast forward to the Saturday before the game. Dr. Rudolph is out getting breakfast with Dave. He comes back to the hotel room, and his wife tells him that head trainer Bubba Tyre just called.
And of course, my radar went up, and I was like, uh-oh, what's going on? So she said, but don't worry, Bubba said it's only Doug Williams. And I went, oh, geez,
Dr. Rudolph rushes to the practice facility.
Joe Gibbs came over to me and said that Doug was having a horrible time at practice this morning, and he couldn't focus in on the plays. He was forgetting things. He was having all sorts of trouble. So when Joe Gibbs went over to Doug and said, hey, Doug, what's going on? Doug said, well, you know what? I hadn't slept very well in the last couple of weeks. And Joe came over and said, listen, I need you to do something for this guy because he's not we're going to have practice, going to be over at noon, and then whatever you can do would be great. I spoke to my friend Dave, and I said, listen, we need to go to your office. We need to figure out what's going on. So, and we get in there and we take a look. We take an x-ray of Doug's jaw, and we look and we see that he's got a 5-unit bridge on the lower right side. So I don't want to get too technical from a dental standpoint, but basically,
Williams needs a root canal.
I never had a root canal. Growing up, we couldn't afford to go to the dentist, talk about root canal, anything. Nah, that's my first time ever having anything done like that.
Long story short, it took about five and a half hours of work to get this resolved.
Add in some post-op painkillers, some antibiotics, and that should have been the end of it. Should have.
Well, I went back to my room and I called a colleague of mine in Washington, D.C., and I said, who was a root canal specialist, and I said, I want to know if there's anything that I did. This is what I did. Is there anything else that you would have done in addition to what I did, because the game is on the line and I needed to know if there was anything else anything that I missed. And he said, nope, what you did was perfect. That's just what I would have done. Everything, that's the best you can do, blah, blah, blah. And that was the end of it. But about 2 or 3 hours later, I get a call from the PR department. I think it was John Canosa at the time. And he says to me, he said, what you did for Doug Williams is all over the news.
Dr. Rudolph cannot figure out how this happened. How did this get out? As a medical professional working for an NFL team, he is keenly aware of the sensitivity of this matter.
So I scratched my head and I called my friend Dave and I said, did you call the news media? And he said, nope, I didn't do that. I wouldn't do that. Finally, it dawned on me, well, the only person that I talked to about this was this person in DC. And so I called that person back. And he said to me, nope, I didn't say anything. I didn't tell anybody. And then I hung up. About a half an hour later, he calls me back. He goes, well, I want you to know that I didn't say anything, but my wife was on the phone when you called.
And that wife just might have told somebody in the media. The story breaks.
And I think the idea was to keep it quiet. And then I think through some crazy set of circumstances, next thing you know, it became a big deal in the papers and everything. I was kind of out of it.
Nobody in the organization, apparently, other than Dr. Barry Rudolph and maybe our trainer, Bubba Tyer, but nobody told Jack Kent Cooke, nobody told John Kent Cooke, nobody told Joe Gibbs that Doug was having a root canal done the day before the Super Bowl. John Kent Cooke called me into his office and said, I need you to go find Doug and make sure Doug's okay. So, I went up to Doug's room, and Doug was in there with family and friends. He may have had 6 or 8 people in the room, and he said he felt great.
Williams is on the mend. Day has turned to night, and it's time for game day eve rituals, Joe Gibbs style.
We had a joint chapel service with the Denver Broncos Saturday night, which was unprecedented. But Joe Gibbs and Dan Reeves were very close. And so we actually had a chapel service with our players and Denver Bronco players that wanted to attend, which was most unusual. And then after that chapel service, we had a team snack and then bust over to the Lawrence Welk Resort Village.
The Lawrence Welk Resort Village.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Lawrence Welk Show.
We always take the team the night before and try and get someplace quiet.
But it is almost impossible to find a hotel for this many people for one night in a 150-mile radius. Somehow, John Kent Cooke finds this resort developed by famous television band leader Lawrence Welk.
And so I actually went up and scoped it out and looked at it, and it was a timeshare. And so people checked out on Saturday and checked in on Sunday, and on Saturday night all these bungalows are empty. And we're like, well, wait a minute. We can make that work. And we were the only ones there. It may have been the most peaceful place on the planet the night before a Super Bowl.
The team and coaches are zenned out and ready for Sunday. Williams is able to get rest, and maybe more importantly, is able to indulge in his special pregame tradition.
And woke up in the middle of the night, I had a bag of Hershey Kisses that I always eat these kisses, and I'm trying to find out, man, I got to find a way. And I took those kisses, and I ate every last one of them, stayed up a little longer. I finally went to sleep, woke up the next morning. It was breakfast time, went to breakfast, and by that time we loaded the bus and drove in to San Diego, to the stadium, Jack Murphy Stadium, and I felt pretty good. No pain at all. It was a great day.
Our congratulations to Joe Gibbs, the Redskins. A class week for the Washington Redskins and Doug Williams in particular.
This episode was narrated, produced, and researched by me, Hannah Lichtenstein, senior copywriter for the Washington Commanders. It was produced and edited by Jason Johnson. Executive producers are Ray Allentine, Ryan Yoakum, and Kevin Klein. Graphics designed by Roman Schumann and Rakim Smith. Social media by Maggie Anchulis and Rebecca Solzbach. Alumni relations help comes from Tim Hightower and Caroline Decio. Special thank you to Dallas Taylor and Katie Monteleone. Thank you to our guests for their contributions, and thank you for listening.